welcome everyone. This is episode 35 of the Comics in Motion podcast. I am your host, Chris Phelps. Dave, again, unfortunately, is working away. This guy does more traveling than a traveling salesman, shall we say. So it's myself again. Now, this episode is slightly different. Interviewing Dr. Alexander Sargent. He's a lecturer in film and media theory from Bournemouth University. I'll give you a quick bio on him in a sec. This episode of the podcast, again, is sponsored by Sudio. That's www.sudio.com. for all your headset and peripheral needs, wireless, wired headsets. If you use Comics in Motion podcast 15, as in 15, on the website with any of your orders, you will get an additional 15% off. They're a great sponsor and a collaborator of our show. So Sudio.com, get on there, guys. Also, I'd just like to announce that the winner of the headset as well is one of our Twitter followers, and the review was from CM7. We have got in touch with him. His name is Chris McLean. So congratulations, Chris. We will be sending off that headset to you in the post in the next few days. So well done, Chris. Hopefully we'll have a competition again soon. We're just hoping to do a digital one so it spreads across every single continent, because we have got quite a few followers from around the world. So thanks, guys. So today's episode is an interview, or sort of interview podcast, with Dr. Alexander Sargent, or Alex as he's known to his friend, and I've got to meet him and stuff. He's a great guy. I'll give you a quick bio over. He's an academic working as a lecturer in film and media theory at Bournemouth University. His research focuses on popular fantasy cinema and animation. Two subjects he's published on widely. He's an academic working as a lecturer in film and media theory at Bournemouth Uni. His research focuses on popular fantasy cinema and animation. This is two subjects he has published about widely. He's the co-founder of the website fantasy-animation.org, which features a regular blog and podcast. And I will say, I've been listening to the podcast. There's 3 up there at the minute. The first one is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it's a great listen, guys. So get onto the podcast, please. Just put fantasy animation in, and it comes up straight away in the iTunes search parameters. Current research projects focus on the relationship between superheroes and ethical philosophy. So cleverer than my pay grade, but it's a great interview. So I just hope you enjoy it. It's something slightly different to what we do. So this is Alexander Sargent. So our guest tonight is Alex. Is it Alex Sargent or Sargent?
Alex Sargent.
I thought so. Thank gosh for that. Yeah, thank you. No, because mine's Christian Phelps, so everyone's always like, how do you spell your second name? It's like, no, the swimmer helped me a lot. So no, nice to meet you, Alex. Obviously, I've been listening to your podcast, and I want to get people out there listening, because it's quite interesting that the fantasy animation podcast is very similar to ours. But can you tell everyone what it's about and where the idea come from and everything? So really interesting to find out about you guys.
Sure. The Fantasy Animation podcast is a podcast I've just set up with a colleague of mine named Chris Holliday, who is an expert on computer animation specifically, but animation in general, who works in King's College London, and I work down in Bournemouth University. But I studied at King's College, where I did my PhD. So we've had quite a long working relationship together, whereby we discovered early on we had lots of very, very similar interests, in that I did my PhD on fantasy cinema, and that's what I still work on at the moment. And he was writing on animation. And the way those two words worked in our sort of academic world would be that they're actually quite different things. There's such a thing as fantasy studies, and there's such a thing as animation studies, and they were two separate things. But invariably, we'd find ourselves like going to the same things, going to the same conferences, applying to write in the same journals, in the same books, all this kind of stuff. So it struck us on a way back from a conference in Birmingham, drinking quite a few cans of lager, that there was a certain, as all great academic work is done, I should stress, with a few tinnies on a train. It struck us that actually, despite the fact that these are supposedly two separate things, obviously they're very, very connected, that there's this massive history of relationship between fantasy cinema and animation. And that is both really obvious and also actually quite deceptively obvious, because what it means is that we just sort of take that for granted, and we could not think of a single organization or publication within our field or anywhere that is really actually thinking about the way in which those two things speak to each other throughout their history. So what we try to do on the podcast, as well as in a book we published very recently, and called Fantasy Animation, and a website we run called fantasy-animation.org is think about different ways in which we can think about and champion and celebrate and interrogate that relationship between fantasy cinema and animation.
Good. So I think you put a lot better than I could have, definitely. No, it's really interesting because obviously we're a comic book based sort of media reviewing podcast as such, and I think, to be honest as well, Alex, that most of the main films, especially the blockbusters now, there is some form of animation or anything, even going to like the Avengers with Thanos and stuff. Yeah, it's Josh Brolin, but that character, and most of these films rely on that sort of skill set, that well, it's just like, it's something that I can't get my head around how clever the technology is now. That, Thanos is a better baddie than probably human baddie, and stuff. I know that's going to the extreme, and your obviously first podcast was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which what I found really interesting was, obviously, a lot of the guys out there who listen to us, I want them to listen to your podcast as well, is there's a couple of things you mentioned regarding the Robin Hood Disney stuff and that, and I've never come across that, like they're using the assets from other Disney things and that. And I suppose, like, I remember I've watched Pinocchio and that over and over again as a kid and stuff like that. So that sort of, well, it's their first ever one, wasn't it? Disney's first proper feature-length film. When you guys were saying it's like 70 to 80 minutes long, that seems really long for animation, but it wasn't, was it? These films after it, that was like proper 2-hour jobs and stuff like that. So for something like that, did you feel it was only necessary to pick that because it was the first major film, basically, or feature-length asset, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, we thought we'd go obvious. Academics are always trying to be clever, so we thought we'd just try and keep it simple, and thought it seemed a bit, in a podcast that's about the relationship between fantasy cinema and animation, start with the first feature-length animation that's based on a fairy tale. So, and then basically what we do in each week in the podcast, we watch one thing, and I try and talk about it from the vantage point of my knowledge on fantasy. So if you listen to the episode, you'll hear me talk a lot about the way it adapts the original Grimm fairy tale. And what Chris does is he brings his knowledge of animation. So he was telling me, and I was learning as he was talking to us and the listeners about ways in which, as you say, Disney developed certain technologies for the film and different periods of Disney history and all that kind of stuff. What we're trying to do, we're only a few episodes in, but we'll be fortnightly from now on, and we've got quite a few in the can, so they won't be drying up anytime soon. Is actually, as you say, go beyond that sort of quite obvious, right, we'll do Snow White, but it's not all just going to be Disney cartoons, and it's not all just going to be cartoons. Yeah. We've just done an episode on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Our latest episode that went live a few days ago is on a film called Jason and the Argonauts, which uses stop motion animation. We've got future episodes on Black Panther coming. We've got episodes on The Greatest Showman, begrudgingly from me, but enthusiastically from Chris.
Yeah.
Tell you about that. Episodes on Moana, the new Disney cartoon, all kinds of different things. Because as you're rightly saying, there's there's so many things you could talk about, and we could hopefully do one on the Avengers sometime soon. All these kind of examples where, because let's be honest, most of the popular films these days are both fantasies and animations, but they're not often talked about as such.
No, and a lot of it now obviously is green screens as well, which years ago they never had the privilege of, did they? It's only something that's come. I mean, how long has green screens been in there, Alex? Is it 20 years, 30 years?
Green screens has been around. It depends what you mean. Green screens in terms of projecting one image from behind the scenes has been around for quite a while. It goes right back to, say, like back projection, where you see like the old films where people are driving in cars.
Yeah, the old classics.
Not. Yeah. And they put the image in behind. So that kind of technology has been around for a while, but I know what you're talking about in the sense that there are less and less things that are photographed anymore, and more things that are made on a computer. One of the recent blog entries we've had on our website was about the film Avatar. And there was actually a campaign when Avatar came out amongst its fans to get it nominated in the best animation category, because they'd done their calculations, and something like 70 to 80% of the movie is rendered entirely through computer animation. So this is a live action movie that is, by all intents, an animation. Right. And there are sort of lots of examples of that. And it's actually quite ridiculous if you think about Disney are going through this new phase of like remaking a lot of their old movies in live action. So if you think about something like The Jungle Book, that's a live action, supposedly a live action remake of an animation, except it's it's not only live action in that there's a small boy in the film. The rest of it is all just through a different animation process.
Yeah. It's a good film, actually.
Yeah, it is a good film. It is a very interesting film. Hopefully we might cover it sometime. But yeah, but another animation. It's not live action at all. You know, it's CGI.
Yeah, and I think as well, like as the world changes and evolves computer-wise, I think, and obviously Avatar was groundbreaking. I mean, you did quite around about 2008, something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, sure. This is what I say that, and then I hastily Google it to check I've not lost.
Yeah, quickly look, because I'm just guessing there, but I'm presuming it's maybe 2010. It's something like that, because obviously they're supposed to be making the second and third one, aren't they, back to back? Are they still being made?
2009. You broke off on me very quickly there, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
2009 Avatar. Yeah.
Oh, so I wasn't far off. So, and that was so far advanced for its time, wasn't it? For, you know, the whole animation and everything about it. And that brought in like 3D to the cinemas. It brought at a different level, not just the daft glasses with the red and the, you know, the thingy and everything. You haven't got any of that. It was a proper age in the start of like the 3D TVs and things like that. So I've got it on special edition Blu-ray here, and it's funny because I saw about this last week on the podcast with a friend of ours, Matt, who comes on. One of my favourite films of all time and it's got bits of animation in. It's Back to the Future, the whole series. Now, and obviously you've got the live action stuff, but some of the I always slate it. But the one bit that always bugs me about Back to the Future is when him and Marty have their legs through the fire at the start, you know, the 88 mile an hour bit where Einstein goes through in the car and you've got all the frost on the car and the ice, because he's supposed to, you know, and there's always that bit where they sort of stand on the tiptoes in the animation and stuff, you know, and all that, and the camera work, you can tell even with the remaster stuff. Oh, I know it sounds daft because it's the mid-80s, but there's some stuff, like we've reviewed stuff with a lot of animation stuff from the 90s, which is fantastic, like the Blade films and stuff like that. A lot of the I suppose you are verging on the CGI type era and stuff, but a lot of the stuff they've integrated, but it's fantastic. But then you can watch stuff from that era, and it's absolutely terrible. The animations, the fantasy side of it. Obviously, I'm going from my sort of basic level of knowledge of that. More of I'm like supposed to be the film buff. Dave's the comic book nerd as such. So we come together. So I'm looking just purely from someone goes to the cinema or goes in front of the TV and watches it. So it's quite an interesting subject. And what I loved about your podcast as well is it was what you said, what Christopher said, or Chris, what it said about the camera work of layers of different things with like the Snow White and stuff. How, especially 1937, you're on the verge of a couple of years later, you've got World War II. And, you know, I think 1939 was The Wizard of Oz. Again, that was a fantasy type film, wasn't it? Judy Garland. That was one of the first colour films, wasn't it? Because it changes halfway through.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first to pioneer Technicolor. It was made by MGM as a response to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They basically said we need one of those. They didn't have a cartoon studio. Absolutely, and made right at the cusp of World War II, which again is a really interesting thing. We could, you know, is that fantasy is often at its most prominent when things are going tough. Things are going well, we tend to get more realistic. And then when things are going tough, we tend to, supposedly retreat into fantasy. I don't really like that word retreat, but certainly at the moment, you know, when things are not necessarily great on the world stage, it's not necessarily a coincidence that we've got so many big, fantastical blockbusters going out there, showing us other worlds and other things and allowing us to sort of escape into them in one way or another. But absolutely, yeah.
Really good. I tell you what is a good film at the moment, especially for the animation and the fantasy stuff. Have you seen Ready Player One?
No, I've not yet. No. Is it good?
Yeah, it's a great film. I didn't see it at the cinema. I watched it about a month ago. And as a big gamer, and obviously he's got a DeLorean as well, the character. That's what he drives. The Back to the Future stuff resonates. It's Spielberg. I was thinking, is it going to be cheesy? And a lot of people say it's not as good as the book. But the actual, I thought it was a great film. You just take yourself away from the whole thing, and this virtual reality world that they've created is fantastic. And there's so many nods. I'm 39 years old, so there's so many nods from my era, from like the early 80s when I was like 3, 4, 5 years old, when I had my first Atari and TV shows that meant stuff in the 80s to me growing up, to all the way through to now current day. It was really good. And the animation and that was fantastic.
Well, now you've got another thing, which is another thing that is very interesting for us, is that gaming culture. If you are playing a computer game, you are engaging with animation, inherently so. If you are using an app, you're probably looking at something that's animated.
Yeah.
Think about how many of the things that we deal with these days that we might call just sort of photographs aren't purely photographic anymore. I mean, anything from Snapchat filters to
Instagram.
All these kind of things. We communicate through these things. So animation is becoming sort of so ingrained within the way we speak to one another.
It's really interesting. I mean, what do you guys see is like the end goal for the site, or is it just more purely to get other collaborators on, other people on to give their perspective? Because it showed listening to your podcast that I'm pretty much winging this podcast when it comes to reviewing these things, because the cleverness of the way you were both approach it, and obviously you've got a background in the fantasy and the animation side of it, and you've got a different way to look at it. But the end game is you're still watching a film. It's just that, what do you guys think you want out of this project as it's going?
That's a good question. So the project had two phases. We're in phase 2 now. The first phase was we decided to make a book, and we produced this book, which is available at the moment. But to be honest, your listeners should probably save their money, because academic publishing means that for the first year or so, it will be a gargantuan amount of money. But that book was basically to show the academic world that there's this fruitful relationship that we don't talk about and that we do now talk about. Once we made the book, we thought that was going to be the end of the journey, and then we realised that actually we produced 15 chapters on a couple of movies, and really there's so much left to say.
Yeah.
And the other thing we realized is that one, we know that there's so much left to say, and two, we don't know what the thing we should say next is. So if we did, we'd write another book, or we'd write a review, or we'd do something, right? But we are happy to admit that we don't know what the next thing of this should be. So therefore, what we need to do is get more people involved.
Yeah.
And the reason we set up the website and the reason we do the podcast is, one, to provide listeners with a sort of informed engagement with fantasy animation by us two talking to each other, and we'll have guests further down the line to sort of help us do that. But also it's to basically open up the conversation beyond me and Chris in a room and get other people involved. So yeah, we're looking to talk to academics. We're always looking to talk to academics. They're really helpful and they can provide voices, but we always talk to academics. Those are the people we already know.
Yeah.
We want to talk to fan groups. We want to talk to filmmakers. We've just had a blog on the website from a screenwriter who's writing an animated script and is thinking about the way he uses fantasy and animation even in the sort of initial script writing phase. We're interested in talking to, basically anyone with a vested interest in this relationship, because actually academic writing is great. And I'm very, very flattered by what you're saying about the podcast. But to be honest, us two sitting there quoting books we've read at you while we watch a movie can only achieve a certain amount of thing. There are so many types of knowledge in the world about these things that we would benefit from learning from, and we want everyone to be involved in the conversation. So I guess my appeal to any listeners out there is that if you think you've got something to say about fantasy animation, then get onto the website, fantasy-animation.org, have a look around, read some of the blogs, and if you don't think what we're saying is covering what you've got to say, then get in touch and let us know, and we'll find a way to include you in the conversation.
No, that's fair enough. I think as well, I'm not just saying this because I said this here before, but I'd be happy to come on as a guest, as the purely as a movie fan. Just from my eyes, I have no background in any of your fields or any sort of qualifications, but just to discuss something, even if it's subjects like one of the films or TV shows or whatever you're going to review on stuff, basically about what we do, I suppose, but from a different perspective. I'd love to come on and chat, because I think as well is we all, as much as obviously you deal in this as it's your career, it's your your job, it's your forte, is when we're watching these things, you want them to take you away from reality, because like they say, a lot of people like reality because it's a lot better than life, so that's why we do it. It's escapism, like you were saying about computer games. Like I can show you now, like my room here, that there is a shrine to every games console ever made. I don't know if you can see it properly, but they've got all the Nintendo, they've even got it labeled by cupboards. These Nintendo, Sega, everything, Microsoft, Sony, and then down there, I've got, you can't see now, I've got my Xbox, and you can't see, it's a terrible picture, but I've got Xboxes, I've got gaming PC. So my escape from reality and fantasy is gaming most of the time, and then the films as well. So I think it's a great subject matter, and I genuinely think that there's so much for you guys there to get into. Like Dave has been, honestly, Alex, Dave has been to get into comics. I've not read comics since I was a kid. It's a bit of a running joke that I used to read The Bean on the Dandy when I was a kid. I used to get them every couple of weeks. Couldn't really afford the Marvel stuff. And Dave's got me reading comics, and we've had comic book creators on the podcast from around the world, and they're making me read it and getting me involved in something that I never thought, or even a year ago, not because I was narrow-minded or anything. It's just something thinking I've got too much stuff going on, but I can actually sit there now, read a comic and understand it. And then when we're reviewing stuff, the subject matter for me is, because it's based on a comic, is actually saying to Dave, what have you got for me to read this week? Or, and Dave will, I don't always read them, but Dave will suggest to me, right, you've got to read this because this means this. And I have done that with our stuff. So I think for you guys as well, it's great to show that sort of analytical breakdown of something, or that sort of the production stuff, of how they've come to that, especially with the cameras and that. It's so interesting, really interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think from my angle, because I guess I'm the fantasy guy on the podcast, is I'm actually very interested in some of the things you were saying there about. I think when we talk about fantasy and reality, I think we both apologize for liking fantasy and actually sort of disguise how much we like fantasy at the same time. And that I completely get what you're saying. And I think people say the same thing all the time, which is this idea of like, there's reality, right? And reality is going to work and paying your mortgage and all the sensible things we're supposed to do. Yeah. And then there's this other thing that we don't really know what to call it, but let's call it fantasy, which is gaming and the posters we have on our wall and the movies we like and all the things that we know are fictitious. Yeah. We pretend like that isn't part of our reality, when actually I would argue that's much more important to our sense of sanity and our sense of what reality is. And I've got just as many geeky things hanging around in my wall. You should see my office desk, it's full of these sort of things. But those things matter to me far more than things that I would call, belonging to reality. Yeah. And I'm quite interested in sort of philosophy, and I'm quite interested in sort of psychology and theories of psychology. And a lot of these things will repeat the same thing, which is actually like, it is our fantasies that help us to understand and make sense of what we might call reality. And the things that are meaningful in our life are meaningful because of our fantasies, or at least a huge part is because of our fantasies. So we dismiss this stuff as, it's just a bit of harmful escapism, harmless escapism. It's something to switch off to at the end of the night. I would argue it's the moments in our day that we actually feel the most alive and the most powerful. So there's something really important to that, which, hopefully we'll also try and get at as we sort of think about these movies that are cheesy and silly and kind of fun, but actually resonate in ways that aren't sensible, but definitely provocative.
That's just such a great explanation, actually. Really good. I'll tell you what then, Alex, and Dave will laugh at this when he listens, and I'm sure some of the other listeners will. There's a film, especially with the animation stuff, there's a film that we've reviewed, and I always go back to it because it's probably the worst. There's a couple of films that have been terrible that Dave's made me review. That's all. I'd love to know your opinion, and it's on YouTube. It's readily available on YouTube. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Generation X. It's a Marvel extension of X-Men. It's from 1996. The whole film is on YouTube. Put it this way, it's that bad, no one's even bothered about claiming the rights on it.
I think the Super Mario Brothers have the same relationship on YouTube.
Bob Hoskins, yeah. No, that is a terrible film. Bob Hoskins is a good actor, terrible. But honestly, if you get a chance, I'd love for you to watch, even if the first 10 minutes of it, and it's about an hour and 25, an hour and 30. It's absolutely atrocious. But from your point of view, or obviously Chris's point of view as well, it's just, it's mind-boggling how bad it is. But are you going to review, which would be quite an interesting thing as well, especially from the perspective of what you both come, both your backgrounds, even some terrible films, do you think, just to see how they got made?
Well, it depends what you mean by what do you mean by terrible films?
Well, actually, you're right there, because it's subjective, isn't it? Because we reviewed Weird Science the other week, and I absolutely hated it because I've never watched it before. So as a 39-year-old man, I was like, this is terrible. But I'm sure as an 11, 12, 13-year-old kid, when it come out, I probably would have lapped it up and loved it. Like I love Ferris Bueller's Day Off, stuff like that. I mean, maybe from your point of view, from your field, the fantasy stuff, like, does it stretch into stuff like been remakes of different things? Like, I know that stuff like World of Warcraft and stuff, and Warcraft's not been well received. And is it that type of fantasy stuff, or is it just anything in general?
Sure, anything. We've got a very inclusive definition of what fantasy and animation means, and actually part of a project I've just about completed and hopefully will be out next year is actually is about genre theory in fantasy. Genre theory is a sort of a thing we do in film studies where we think about what genres mean and why they're important. So there's loads of books on all kinds of different genres, but there's not that many on fantasy. And my theory as to why is because the first conversation, the way when I have conversations with people and tell them I work on fantasy cinema, it usually goes this way, which is I go, I work on fantasy cinema, and then someone asks me, what do you mean by the word fantasy? What does that mean? They instantly want me to sort of classify it or define it for them. And that's sort of the way film studies has gone. Usually, which is that someone writes a book on a horror movie, they'll start and they'll go, right, a horror movie is a movie that it has to have 7 ghosts in it, 14 skeletons, and someone has to run upstairs inexplicably after running away from a serial killer. And if it does those 10 things, it's a horror movie, and those are the things I'm going to be analysing. So it's the academics defining what genres are. And I'm sort of arguing that one, that's a bad practice anyway, but it's a particularly bad practice with fantasy because fantasy means so many different things to so many people. And it can mean, and that can be quite dangerous politically to try and define what fantasy is, because like to me, Passion of the Christ is a fantasy because I'm an atheist and I don't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. And watching Passion of the Christ is therefore a depiction of something supernatural on screen that I do not believe. But to many people, it's an incomplete affirmation of their sense of reality, and I wouldn't take that away from them. So basically, I don't think academics, my job or an academic's job is to tell people what fantasy means. I think my job is to try and understand what they mean when they use that word to define the things they like. That's what I'm much more interested in doing.
No, honestly. And I think as well, like me and my wife, and I'm happy to admit this, like you say, fantasy, you have stuff around you. Like just above me there is Heath Ledger. I had that someone drew that for me in Las Vegas, and I've got my football stuff there. But you've got this, what you define as fantasy. Yeah, I'm a big superhero fan and everything, but I can sit with my wife on a Sunday afternoon like we do, and we'll watch some. I should be really admitting this, should, as I'm supposed to be like this, tough man CUNY, but we can sit there and watch like these rom-coms or like these daft comedies, which might be a 3 or a 2 out of 5 on Rotten Tomatoes, and I can quite enjoy them. But it's fantasy. It's just total. That is fantasy. It might be there's no special effects, there's no animation, but it's a fantasy story, and it's if you come away from that enjoying it, and it's taking you away from thinking about you've got to wash the pots or whatever you've got to do, I've got to iron my work stuff or whatever you've got to do, that's still classed in my eyes. And like you say about genres as well, take for example, I know I'm going off a slight tangent. I remember watching Dusk Till Dawn, right? 1996. I'm watching it. It's a total run of the mill. George Clooney, Tarantino are just 2 absolute scumbag prisoners. They've escaped from prison, 2 brothers. I didn't have any clue when I watched that film that halfway through it, it's going to go from a run-of-the-mill sort of cop-chasing gangster type film to a horror film, a vampire thing. It just went absolutely crazy. I fell in love with Salma Hayek and everything. And then that whole film, I was absolutely blown away. And it was one of my favourite films of the 90s because it was like, how could you define that as anything? You'd have to break it up as such. Well, you could say ultimately it's a vampire film as such. Spoilers, by the way, if anyone's watched it. But do you understand what I mean? As an example, that's a total plot twist.
I think genres are words that we use to describe experiences we feel when we watch movies. And the movie industry love it because that means, okay, if we can make a movie that makes people feel that, then they'll come and pay their money and they'll get that as the exchange. Comedy's an easy one, right? I'll give you my 11 quid. I'll come in the cinema. You make me laugh. That's the contract, yeah. But I think that's true of all genres, right? It's just when we get to things like fantasy, science fiction, horror, thriller, romantic comedy, what those things make us feel is harder to put into words.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I try to do on the podcast and on the website in my role is try and put that into words a bit better and think about, okay, if it's a fantasy, what does that therefore mean? That's not that's not the end of the story. That's the start of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's true. And I think as a gamer as well, like for a game, I'm a gamer since I was 3 or 4 years old, I play every day, but fantasy to a gamer is probably an RPG, a Zelda, something where it's purely, total fantasy. You're just going around doing little things and concocting potions and stuff. But really, every computer game is fantasy because it's not real. Whether it's FIFA, I play PUBG a lot, PlayerUnknown Battleground, Battlefield games and stuff like that. They are just total fantasy, and like you say, they're all everything around what I'm doing now. Somewhere along the lines, there's an animation or there's something. Before you came on, I've been on my phone on the Vegas slots. I'm going to Vegas in November, so you can have these free slots to win money. But I've got animation on my phone. I know you're so right. The world now is so far advanced in technology. We're actually swallowed up by this virtual reality. And for you as well, I would suggest watching Ready Player One and Chris, because that is this thing what we're talking about. This whole thing of breaking from the humdrum, horrible life, not horrible life that you live in, but that's how the film depicts it. And they just live in this virtual world, and it's so much better. A bit like The Matrix, I suppose, in some respects.
Yeah. Which I still think is an absolute classic. I've stopped showing it to my students now because my students keep saying the phrase "old film" when they watch it because they're 18, and the problem with teaching 18-year-olds is that they stay the same age and you just get older.
I love it. I love The Matrix.
Think about it. They were born. If you're an 18-year-old now, you were born in 2000, which means The Matrix came out before you were born.
Yep.
Terrifying. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But great.
No, I love it. Absolutely love it. Keanu Reeves is brilliant in that. Mr. Anderson. I've got him all over here. Yeah. The second and third ones were a bit iffy, weren't they? They filmed them back to back, but the first one was fantastic. Absolutely. And again, that's got some great set pieces, and I know some of the gun scenes in that was that one where Trinity goes to rescue him, and that's all done in that building, wasn't it, where they had things going off and everything, and she even actually sprained her ankle when she does that jump just before she goes up to get Morpheus. But a bit of movie trivia. You probably know better than me, to be honest.
Well, no, I didn't know that, but I do love stories like that, and actually that makes me think of the other thing we're seeing is because animation is everywhere. We're seeing this desire to get back to sort of physical world so we practical effects is one thing, but also like the new Mission Impossible movie, just are so obsessed, and now I am one of them, with like the stunts and that they're real and that Tom Cruise is actually up there on that building, all this kind of stuff. So we're seeing this sort of return to things that can be felt and touched again because so much of our lives can't be, right?
Exactly. No, you're right. And obviously, I've still not watched this yet, but I know that Mission Impossible is supposed to be absolutely fantastic. And he broke his leg, didn't he, in London when he jumped from building to building? Not the filming back, but they're the sort of stuff. There is going to be animation stuff in that film. There's no doubt about it. But Tom Cruise is a legend. He's getting the credit now as he gets older for what he's prepared to put his body through, and he's not, it's not like the old Roger Moore stuff, like he's hanging out of a plane like this, waving to someone. The scene, the backs, like you say, the green screen and such is behind him and stuff. It's none of that stuff. It's proper. He's on that plane as it's getting taken off and stuff like that.
Yeah, careful now. Let's not insult Roger Moore in front of me. I'll kick off because I'm a massive Bond fan. But
no, I love.
I'm joking.
Roger Moore's my favourite James Bond. Yes, him and Daniel Craig are my favourites.
There's a very famous in film studies says that the opening scene from the Bond movie A View to a Kill. Where Bond isn't doing this ski sequence, and he's got his hood up. And the reason he's got his hood up is Roger Moore is 57 at this point and basically can't move. And famously, he didn't travel to the location where the stunt is set. So anytime you see a man move in that film at the beginning, it isn't Roger Moore.
That's when when the Beach Boys comes on, he changes.
That's it. Yeah. Oh.
This what I'm saying. I'm not just saying it because you're on. I'm a massive. It's Grace Jones. He's driving the is it the Citroen around Paris, and he gets smashed up, and he ends up in just the front two wheels at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower. Oh, I'm a massive James Bond fan. Absolutely love him.
We're actually planning an episode coming up in a month or so on the James Bond movies as a sort of special. We might do one on the animated title sequences, actually, I think is what we'll do.
Brilliant. I'll tell you which one I love is Live and Let Die, which was his first James Bond as well, Roger Moore, when he runs over them crocodiles. It's just, the guy with the claws there, and the hand and stuff. But no, James Bond stuff's on point. I must say to Alex, one of the things that isn't a fantasy one, Dr. No, Sean Connery, his first one, and we all know he's got a wig on. That wasn't animation or anything like that. And do you ever see the bit where he gets his hair and puts it on the cupboard and goes out?
Yeah.
You've seen that bit?
Yeah, I know the bit. So
and he goes in the room, doesn't he? And he licks the hair, puts it on the door, and then he knows the guys in the cupboard to have a fight with him at the start. I always remember that. It's just daft little things with James Bond, but yeah, so effective.
And moments like that are the things in the movie where you get the Bond. I always like Dr. No because Dr. No has the Bond theme in it. But whilst like today you get the Bond theme when he like jumps over a helicopter and manages to city. Here we get it when he's like walking into a hotel room or
yeah, because either Daniel Craig or Skyfall, he don't get it until he gets the DB5. When he goes to get that with them, and he goes, doesn't he, and gets goes to the garage. That's when the music kicks in. 'Cause I was in the cinema nudging my wife, going, "It's the music." She's not interested one bit. I went to a Quantum of Solace premiere. My wife went to Evans Alshaw, and who own Aston Martin and stuff, and all these people are there. Quantum of Solace has got slated a bit, but I enjoyed it. And they're all
I really like Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, I did. I mean, they're all there, and the Dickie Bowes and everything, and I've just said just casual, and all these people are talking, Alex, as the film started, and I never do this, and I'm like, shh, shut up now, I'm trying to watch it, and everyone's just sat there, they're quiet around me, because I'm like, I'm a Bond fan, I don't need you talking just because you got free tickets, I come here for the film. You know what I mean? Anyway, sorry, we've got off on a tangent, haven't we? But yeah,
so many times in my life I've managed to sabotage this and turn it into a Bond conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy about that because we'll never talk about it when me and Dave do it. So yeah, I'm happy with a bit of a James Bond. I even went to the cinema to watch The Living Daylights with Dalton. That is an awful. Well, I mean, License to Kill is pretty bad, but Living Daylights was okay because I hard did the theme song, didn't he? But yeah, it's not one of the best. The blonde girl's quite pretty in it.
Yeah, Maria Diablo. I can't remember her character name, but yeah, very good, very good.
And just one last Bond thing, as you were saying about A View to a Kill, that was at the same time that Never Say Never was being filmed, the unofficial Bond film, wasn't it, with Sean Connery? That's a good one as well. There's some good car chase scenes in that.
Do you know the history as to why that film came into being? I could tell it.
Tell me, because I
want a half an hour Bond anecdote on the end of the podcast.
No, go
very
for it.
Interesting history. It's just you Google it, listeners, if you're interested.
No, you should have told me. I'm happy with it. I have read something on that because the Broccoli family wouldn't sanction it, would they? Is it something like that?
I'll try and do it in a sort of Twitter post, a vocal Twitter post. There was Ian Fleming wrote a screenplay, an original screenplay with a man named Kevin McClory. He wrote this original screenplay with this guy, and then they decided not to submit it to anyone. And then Fleming turned that into a book, Thunderball. And basically that kickstarted about a 60-year lawsuit because Kevin McClory sued Ian Fleming and basically got partial rights to all James Bond novels and all James Bond figures, and that movie is produced by Kevin McClory because he managed to get the rights back for Thunderball and make a rival Bond movie.
No, that is
to it than that, but that's the least boring way I can tell it.
You need to. I'm happy to throw my hat in again as a guest. If we're going to do a Bond episode, I'm all in. I love Bond. Absolutely love all the chauvinistic and everything. And I'm joking, ladies, but yeah, he's proper Bond fan. Love him. Jaws, everything, all of them. Oh, we'll be here all night now with that, Alex. Sorry.
Sure.
Right on. Is there anything else you want to chat about before we wrap it up?
No, I think. Listen, I feel bad we didn't talk about superheroes at any point. Superheroes are obviously really important for fantasy, and I think there'll be future work on that from our end on that. As I say, we've probably got an episode on Black Panther coming up sometime soon. We're probably recording that shortly. But other than that, if people sound like they like the likes of it, I would suggest you download the podcast. Please give us a rating, give us a review. I'm sure, as you say on your podcast, every little helps to grow an audience. And check out the website, fantasy-animation.org.
No, definitely. And I think as well, honestly, guys, please give Alex and Christopher. Is it Christopher or Chris? Because I feel bad.
I call him Chris, so they may as well. I don't see why they should give him any more respect.
As only a true friend would say, I like it. Yeah. And Chris, please give him a follow. And what I'll do as well, Alex, I'll put all the links to your website and the episodes in the bio of this and get you out there as well. And I'll retweet and do as much as we can as well. Because I think as well, it's so interesting, guys. Honestly, if you've not listened to the podcast, please listen and get on iTunes. And it's fantasy stroke animation.
The website's fantasy-animation. The podcast is called Fantasy Animation. But if you just type Fantasy Animation into your iTunes,
comes up, doesn't it?
You'll find it. You can also download them on the website if you prefer.
Brilliant stuff. Now, thank you so much, Alex. Where can you find you on Twitter as well?
They can find me at Freud is Funny, and you can find the research network at FanAnim Research, FANANIM Research.
Oh, brilliant.
That's also a Facebook group we have. We've just set this up, so I should plug this. We've got a Facebook group, Fantasy Animation, and actually there's a forum on that where we're looking for people to post future suggestions for episodes, and at some point we'll gather all those and see if we can do any of them, and we'll try and do as many as we can. So we'll be happy to accommodate requests if you want to post on that.
I'm on that one. You'll have to get me on Facebook as well, Alex. I love stuff like this, so I'll definitely be getting involved. Definitely. Well, thank you so much. And maybe next time we get Dave here and we get Chris on, we can have a full
we'll review something, right? That sounds. I know Chris teaches Marvel movies all the time in his courses at King, so we'll be up for reviewing anything you fancy for us.
Oh, that's great. And also, you could do it as a crossover if you want. So if we do the episode together, you use it for yours and vice versa. Or we're happy to do that. It'd be great. A really good experience, especially Dave's the comic book aficionado, so he'll have all the background on that. So definitely.
Well, I know I know enough about comic book movies at the moment, but I know nothing about comic books. So I think Dave would be the voice of authority on that.
Yeah, he would. I mean, I try and bluff it, but Wikipedia and that's only going to give me so much information when he's not here. So
it's the story of my career.
All right, so take care, and I'll see you.
Thanks a lot. Lovely to chat to you.
Great interview, Alexander. Thank you so much as well. Again, this episode is sponsored by Sudio.com. That's Sudio, www.sudio.com. Use the code Comics in Motion Podcast 15, as in 15 at the end. You get 15% off all orders on their website. A couple of plugs as always. Grassroots Coach Cast will be back in a few weeks. Dave and Ben talking about grassroots level coaching as the new season starts. I know with Dave being away at the moment, put them back a week or so, but there will be episodes quite regular again. My vlogging channel, CPod78 Vlogs on YouTube. Give me a follow, or on Twitter is Chris Phelps78, and give me a follow and watch some of my vlogs around New York, Llandudno, all sorts of places. I'm all gearing up for my Vegas trip in November, guys. So if you want to get in touch with the show, it's Comics in Motion Podcast at gmail.com, or give us a follow on Twitter at Comics in Motion P. And we would love you to give us any 5-star reviews on iTunes, guys, or any reviews at all. So get on there if you can, listen to some of the episodes, critique, whatever you feel. But please, any reviews helps the show grow. Also, we are part of the Brit Pod scene. Put hashtag in Brit Pod scene on Twitter, and it'll bring up numerous different podcasts available across all sorts of social and intellectual levels. Okay, guys, I've been Chris Phelps, and as always, see ya.